Welcome to In a World with Real Media. I'm your host, Brad Burrow. In this podcast, we'll dive into the lives of the most successful people in business. We'll learn how they overcame adversity, took advantage of opportunities, and learned from their experiences. Learn from our experts, get inspired, then go live your story. It's In a World with Real Media. Hello and welcome to the In a World with Real Media podcast. I'm Brad Burrow. Today I have Glenn Stockton from Stockton Law in today, and I met them doing a video shoot down at KCPT and kind of learning about wills and trusts, and I was just fascinated by all of the nuances of all of that. So, Glenn, I'm glad to have you in today. I'm excited about getting into learning more about these things, but I also want to talk a little bit about you. I mean, I was reading your bio, and how long have you had Stockton Law?
So we're now Stockton and Kent.
Okay.
Started off as Stockton Law 25 years ago.
It's StocktonLaw.com though, right?
StocktonLaw.com,
okay.
Right. We had the same website for a lot of years.
Yeah, you don't want to change your website, that's for sure. So you grew up in rural Kansas around Emporia.
That's correct. So moved there when I was 10 years old. My dad had been U.S. Navy and had gone out to Southern California with the Navy and met my mom there, and I lived there till I was 10. But when my great-grandparents died, we moved back to what was left of the old homestead, family homestead. I grew up in the home. My dad had lived there for a period when he was young. My grandma was born there and raised there. So yeah, there was a lot of history in that. So I got to grow up on that just outside of Emporia.
Well, had to be a little bit of a shock going from Southern California to Emporia, right? Do you remember that?
I remember it very well. And even though I'd been to Kansas multiple times for family visits, I still had the idea that I was coming back and there was going to be cowboys and Indians. And why I thought this, I don't know. But that was a little disappointing. But
yeah,
no, I really enjoyed my time growing up on a farm and just in rural America.
So were you around the beach in Southern California? I mean, was that kind of...
We were not far. We were in the Los Angeles area,
okay,
Riverside area. And but we could, from our home, we could be in the mountains. We could go to the beach. We could go to the desert. We could really, that was pretty neat that we could be anywhere. But
yeah.
We weren't on the beach, but certainly within 45 minutes or so of it.
I don't think we have any beaches in Kansas that I know of that are at least close to Emporia. Right?
There was always the beach at Melbourne Lake where we went as a kid. Yeah. None too close.
One of the things I wanted to ask you, Glenn, is growing up in the Midwest, especially in a rural, type of community, there's a work ethic and a business approach that comes from that's different. Would you agree with that? Has that impacted you?
Absolutely. It and I think part of it, growing up in rural America, we had had livestock that had to care for.
Right.
There was just things had to be done, and when I got off that school bus, there were chores that had to be done. I took my first job at 12 years of age, and in addition to that, had a paper route, and I've always said I think I could audition for the commercials with Patrick Mahomes of Never Not Working, the old Head and Shoulder commercials.
Right.
Because it just has been part of me from a very young age.
I remember something you mentioned to me earlier was even you can remember at the age of 5 looking, saying, "Well, how does this work?" That curiosity kind of driving, business.
Yeah, I can remember, going into like restaurants and watching the flow of work, and I'm just a young, like 5, 6 years of age, and thinking to myself, that's not how I would do it. So why my head was wired that way and paying attention to it, I'm not sure, but I would think about those things at a young age, and so always been very entrepreneurial.
Do you think that's kind of driven, owning a firm and, working with other businesses, things like that, the ingenuity that comes with that?
Certainly, I think, that factored into my wanting to run my own business.
Yeah.
I grew up, I had an uncle who was a business owner, and he was a mentor to me growing up, someone I really looked up to, and he owned his own business. And so I think I had decided probably by age 12 that I was going to own my own business someday. But so all this, it just kind of all factors in, plays together as we go through this journey of life and
Right.
where you end up. So much impacted by things that are happening to you in your childhood and growing up.
So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about a little bit. I mean, you're involved in lots of different entrepreneurial type things now, but we'll talk about that later. But I want to get into. So you went to Benedictine, right?
I did.
And what took you there? Because you got several colleges around probably where you grew up, right? Emporia State, Wichita State, KU. How did you end up at Benedictine?
So I took a little non-traditional route, I suppose. I was planning to go to Emporia State. I had been working with my dad for the summer and was getting ready to go back to school, and decided to go back to work where I had worked in high school. One of my jobs had been at a Pizza Hut in Emporia, Kansas. And my first night on the job, this pretty little blonde walked across my make table in front of it, and it was over. So my wife and I started dating at a very young age, got married, started a family, and so school got put on the back burner for a bit, and I decided, okay, I need to get back to school. And I'd always kind of knew, I don't know how or where this came from, but the law had always interested me, and I had this idea I wanted to go to law school. And my wife was wanted to be an educator. And so I started community college at Fort Scott, and was looking at where I was going from there. And one of the administrators, he was Dean of Student Affairs, brought me in and said, I really want you to consider Benedictine. They have shown interest in you. And so they had me up, and they offered me a scholarship,
Really?
a presidential scholarship to go up there. So
Awesome.
So which that was helpful too. That they were going to pay all my costs.
No kidding.
But when I went up there, I immediately knew this is where I wanted to be. It was
Really a beautiful campus, isn't it? I've been there several times for baseball tournaments and things like that. And it's like you drive up the hill. It's awesome.
Yeah, I used to sit, and it's changed a lot since the years I was there, and that. But the campus, the setting has not. And I used to sit on the bench that they have now, overlooking the mighty Mo as you come on the bend, and we just find inspiration. I got there to do a lot of reading. So beautiful campus. And it was a great school, liberal arts education. That all that was what I was looking for. So a lot of credit that I give to Benedictine for my education.
Now, where did you go to law school?
So I left Benedictine. I went to the University of Edinburgh in Edinburgh, Scotland, and I did a program over there in really international studies. What I thought I was going to do was go to. So it's a long answer.
That's good.
Turning to give a long answer. But
that's great.
Yeah, I thought I wanted to pursue a career in international law. So I was over in Edinburgh, and I was really studying monetary policy, and one of the instructors, he was a co-editor of the Journal of Common Market Studies. And so I got to be inside in some of the high-level meetings that were going on at the time, as Europe was considering going to the single currency, because this was in the days before the euro, and thought I was going to go into that, and was really interested in monetary policy. When I went to law school, that was at the University of Kansas, and we decided after being away from our families for that time in Scotland, that because we had children by this point, as I said, I was a non-traditional student, that it was important to have our kids back. So I went to the University of Kansas for law school, and
what an experience, though. That had to be awesome, being overseas like that. And I mean, not too many people get to experience maybe some of the things that. I mean, you were there for how long? A year or two?
So just there for a year.
Yeah,
1 year. Yeah.
So did you do a lot of travel around there? It sounds really awesome.
Throughout Scotland, absolutely. I was there on a student budget. So while I had scholarship that paid my tuition and books, living was not covered under that. So, and having a wife and 3 children, and she was not allowed to work. So it was, so travel was somewhat limited, but we saw a lot of Scotland, and it was a magical time, magical year.
Man, that sounds amazing. So if I remember correctly, there's a reason that you really kind of decided to focus in on wills and trusts and trust law. Can you tell that story? I heard this at KCPT, I believe, but this is a really an interesting story.
So yeah, so I my where I thought I was going to go into international law, and had been doing everything through my undergraduate studies and that to prepare for that. Shortly before we went to Scotland, my grandmother and grandfather, they lived in Louisville, Kentucky. My mom had been an only child, and my grandmother died, and she was in better health than my grandfather, so we thought, but she didn't wake up one morning. My mom tried to convince my grandfather to move back here to Kansas so she could help look after him. He really wasn't able to live on his own. On his own.
Needed
He
help,
needed assistance.
Yeah.
But he did not want to leave his home. And so after my grandmother's funeral, my mom stayed behind and helped arrange for home care to come in and help take care of my grandfather in his home. And then she came back to Kansas. And 6 months later, we got a call from my grandfather that he'd gotten remarried. And guess who he remarried? It was the home care worker that was in the home. And then about 3 months after that, he himself died. So, it was within a short time of my grandmother's death that, he'd already remarried and then died himself.
Wow.
And everything ended up going to that new spouse. So when we went to my grandfather's funeral, same funeral home my grandmother had, we'd had her funeral at just shortly before. The funeral director, he greeted us at the door when we got there. And we knew, my mom had not been part of the funeral planning like she had helped my grandfather with my grandmother. The new spouse had done that, and we understood that. We got there, the funeral director greeted us at the door, and he remembered us. And I could just tell there was something, he was uncomfortable about something. He was a little nervous. And I picked up on that, just thought, what the heck's going on?
Yeah.
I remember having that thought process in my head, like something's up, I don't know what it is yet. And then he hit us with it that he says, look, Mrs. Reiner, so my new now grandmother, I guess,
Yeah.
and, Mrs. Reiner's made clear you guys are not welcome back in the family room. You're going to need to sit out here in the chapel. And so we did. At the end of the funeral, we had not left yet to make our way to the cemetery. My new grandmother, I guess, the new wife, came to me and said, look, you guys are not welcome at the home. However, if you'll give me about an hour after we leave the cemetery, I do have some things I want your mom to have, and I'm going to put them out on the end of the driveway. So after we left the cemetery, we went out to lunch with some extended family, and then we made our way to my grandparents' house. And sure enough, out on the end of the driveway was a box. It had a few knickknacks and, picture frame and my grandmother's Bible, which is one of the two things we talked about we really wanted. It was clear my mom was not going to get anything of value, but we thought that Bible had been handed down through multiple generations. It had genealogy records. And that was something we really wanted to get. And the other thing was the photo albums. We thought, why would she want those? It's not her family. And so this was my mom growing up, us grandkids, my grandparents when they were young, et cetera. And they weren't there. And so, I was the one who went up and knocked on the door. Pretty sure she was there because I'd seen at the funeral that she was driving my grandmother's car, and it was sitting right there in the driveway and the boxes on the end. So I went up and knocked on the door, but she wouldn't answer. And this was the days before cell phones when, we drove to a payphone not far away, and I called and I called and I called. She finally answered, and I said, Brenda, all we want are the photo albums. And she hung up. We never got those. Well, I started law school not long after that, thinking I was going into international law. But I took a class on wills and trust because I was really curious, like, how did that happen? How did she end up with everything? Because I didn't fully understand it. But that course, what I found is my passion was not in international law like I thought it had been. I had been preparing for that. I really found my passion was in wills and trusts. So it definitely influenced me and career choices. And, as a young attorney, I don't know if I had enough gray in my hair to do only estate planning. I'd have been twiddling my thumbs some. But so I did some other things in addition to estate planning. So when I started the law firm, that was where my passion was really at. And then over the years, I was able to gravitate where that's all I do now.
Do you think back if we'd only just done this? I mean, or do you look at that maybe more of a positive type a view where like that changed the path of my life potentially?
with respect to what happened with my grandparents?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. I credit that. It changed the path of my life. Absent that, I don't know that I would have. Maybe I would have happened here anyhow. I'm not sure,
Yeah.
but it certainly was my motivation why I took that class, is to figure out, like, how did she end up with everything? It didn't seem
Yeah.
right. I didn't understand,
Boy.
why that was. But
You probably have empathy for people that are going through things like that now, I bet, huh?
that story, I see it played out over and over. And fortunately, it's us guys more time. I mean, others going in, but
Yeah.
as guys, we tend to remarry at a higher percentage rate just because there's so many more women in that season of life, I guess, with
Yeah.
women's longer life expectancy. But I see this remarriage scenario play out where all the assets end up going to spouses if people don't plan properly. And it's so easy to plan for and to make sure that doesn't happen. But it does take some planning, because by law, and this is what happened with my grandparents, I
Yeah.
mean, it all became hers. And there were various things that factored into it in my grandparents' situation, but see it all the time. So it becomes a something that we talk about with clients all the time. Is this important to you? Is this something you want to make sure that your assets go to who you want, when you want, the way you want, and that a remarriage of a spouse isn't going to throw a wrench in that? And so we can certainly plan for that. So it's a
Yeah.
common discussion we have.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be important to everybody? I mean, I sit here listening to the stories, like, who would not want to have everything taken care of, I guess. But we don't. We're talking about us a little bit. We get, as a business owner, you get so focused on, doing what you need to do to keep the business going. You don't think about things like that.
And that's where I think, having where you rely on professionals, that is what, they do. They help you think about
Right.
that. And I'm big at, there's no cookie cutter recipe that says, well, everybody just needs to do this. It's what are your goals? What is it you're trying to accomplish? What's important to you? What's that legacy you're trying to leave? And so that's a big thing within our firm, is to really understand that, so that we can create an estate plan that's customized to the client and what is important to them. And if I can understand that, then I can make that happen. And so we spend all the time, making sure, in fact, we have these conversations, internally within the firm of, making sure we dive deep into trying to really understand what it is that they're trying to do. And I can, over the years, just see, how our processes have changed, where I figured out, okay, we need to have another meeting where we can come in and kind of create this buffer. It's not just come in, have a meeting, and all right, your next meeting, come in and sign documents. We want to work through. And there are times that that's all we need to do. But
Yeah.
for most people, we want to make sure that we're designing the plan to cover the things that are truly important.
So not one approach is the same for everybody. Is
Right.
basically what you're saying. We really got to ask questions and try to understand motivations and what do you want to happen. Then you make a plan.
Yep. What are the assets that you have? I mean, can make a difference. Are you a business owner, and would be different than, somebody who didn't own a business?
Right.
I mean, we got to plan for some different things there. Do you have children? Do we not have children? Those kind of things can factor in.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so one of the things I wanted to ask, there's probably a lot of misinformation about wills and trusts. What actually happens. Can you tell me, like, what are some of the biggest misconceptions about wills and trusts that people believe?
Well, I think one is people often believe all they need is a will, right? And they don't really fully understand a will and what a will does, and that they think that trust, well, that's for people that have a lot of money. And I think that's unfortunate. And it goes to some how trust, I think, gained traction. It was used as a tax planning tool for people that had higher net worths. But trusts are fantastic estate planning vehicles. And so if the things that a trust can do are important to you, then I say, well, we should look to a trust. If the things that a trust does really aren't important, and we can just use a will surrounded by some other documents and beneficiary designations, we do that. So I always tell clients, out of the gate, the first thing is don't overcomplicate this stuff. Keep it simple.
Right.
But be comprehensive. I don't have a crystal ball. You don't have one either. They don't have one. So, we have to plan for the what ifs of life. So be comprehensive in planning. But I think one of the misconceptions is trusts are for people that have a lot of money.
Yeah.
Or that all I need is a will. So I think that's a common one. And I think another is people think of estate plan, when they think of it, they're thinking about what happens if I die. And for estate planning, it's more than that. It's like, well, what if you're living, but you can no longer make decisions for yourself? What if you're living, but you're no longer able to live at home? You need to go into nursing care, assisted living. It can be expensive. How are we going to pay for that? How are we going to plan for that? Not every dollar is created equal. I mean, there's, how do we minimize the impact of taxes? So estate planning is much more comprehensive than just where do my assets go when I die?
Yeah. So my mind's going in a lot of different directions here. What are give me 3 or 5 things that people need to know. I feel like education is something you probably have to educate every person that comes into the firm, right? I mean, I doubt too many people actually understand the level that they need to understand to really make decisions. Is that a correct thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. I'm big on education, and at heart, maybe I'm more like my wife, who was an educator.
Right.
I convinced her to come join us in the firm years ago and give up. She was teaching school, but I think if people understand, what's possible and what they do, and I want them to understand the plan, why they have it. So
right.
I'm big on education. I get out and do educational events around the city and beyond multiple times a month. So I think it is important for people to understand, how we can accomplish things so that they can make informed decisions to make sure that what they're doing is best for them and their loved ones.
How can somebody go out and learn about wills and trusts? Where would they do that?
Well, I mean, there's so much information that's available in today's world, right?
Yeah.
We have information overload. But a lot of times you have to be careful with that. So we do education workshops. So if somebody wanted to come in, if they would contact us, go to our website or reach out to us, we do no-cost educational workshops on, estate planning basics, trustee schools, where we're going to talk, what's a will, what's a trust, what's the difference, when are they appropriate, the living documents, what do you need to know about powers of attorney. So I think it's at what level do you want? I tell, some people that at one level there's a 3-year program over at the University of Kansas that you can really dive deep in this stuff. And so, but getting that education. So I think, going to educational events about this, and people are like, well, why would I want? I mean, that sounds horrible to learn about this, but it's actually very interesting, and it's so relative that I find people really enjoy learning about this stuff because they can see how it directly impacts them and their families.
Yeah. So what are 3 things you think people need to know? If you could pick 3 things, what would they be?
One, that you need to have an estate plan in place, that we don't always get second chances.
Right.
And this is something that's easy to put off and think, I know I need to do it. I think we all understand we need to do it, but I can't do it today. And so we put off, and I just think we don't get second chances. 2, people often think, well, all I need's a will. And they don't understand that wills by their very nature have to go through probate. So typically when we're looking at it, we look at a will as a sweater in the suitcase. We'll revert to the will or lean on it if we need to, if we miss something. But we're typically, for most clients, looking how to avoid probate. And certainly we can do that with trust, but we can do it with beneficiary designations, joint tenancy falls in. So I think they think all I need is a will would be number 2 misconception. And the third one, I think, is that people think it's complicated. And it doesn't need to be. And so that's back to, our philosophy is don't overcomplicate this stuff. Keep it simple. Just make sure you're being comprehensive.
3 key mistakes people make. We probably talked about this already a little bit. Not doing anything's got to be one of them, right?
Right. So it's back to, thinking I can do it later. So not getting anything done at all is, the states, you're governed under state law, sometimes multiple states, and where do you own property? So
right.
You and I are sitting here in Kansas right now. So someone died in Kansas and owned property in Kansas. Well, they would be governed by Kansas law. But if they also had a lake home over in Missouri, or they own some, oil wells in Oklahoma, we may have probate in 3 different states going on simultaneously.
Wow.
So that not doing it would be an absolute mistake.
Yeah.
Not coordinating their estate plan with the assets they have. The estate plan's governing assets, what happens to them. We either have to make sure that the assets, we've got to make sure they're titled properly, beneficiary designations are set up. And so you have to do that. And so, in our firm, I always tell people, I look at estate planning as a team sport. If you've got a financial advisor you work with, they need to be part of this. We need to be coordinating, because they can have something set up entirely different with how they've done beneficiaries and titling of accounts than what the estate plan says. Well, for those assets, those titling and beneficiary designations are going to prevail over the estate plan itself. And I think the third thing is not reviewing this on a regular basis, because we can get it all right coming out of the gate and we get everything lined up and it's titled properly and beneficiaries, everything's in place. But over time, as accounts change, we close that account up, we open a different one, it gets out of alignment. And maybe even the choices you made in your estate plan, who's going to be, taking over at your incapacity, death, who are your beneficiaries, all that stuff can change as life happens. So like in our firm, we like to do what we call the annual check-in or annual review. We don't charge for those meetings. We've always found that to be mutually beneficial. We're not charging, but believe me, we benefit, because our clients, if they have future legal needs, tend to look to us and our firm rather than the attorney on the street. But part of that annual check-in, what we're doing, first of all, we're confirming plan choices. Here's who you named to make financial decisions. Here's who you named to make healthcare decisions. Here's who you've named as beneficiaries. Is this still the way you want it? What I find is that it can change and does change over time, but not that frequently. The second part of that meeting, in addition to asking how's your health, how's the health of everybody going in, we're looking at the assets. Okay, here's where you had all your cash accounts, checking, savings, money market CDs, here's your retirement, life insurance. That stuff, if nothing more, the values are changing, which can affect, how we do things because of taxation. But we find lots of change there. And that's where you just want to keep that stuff up. And so, we encourage our clients, as I tell clients, look, I'm not charged for this meeting, take me up on it, because this stuff's important.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's awesome. So I want to switch gears, small business. A lot of people that watch the podcast own businesses. How do you help small business owners protect their assets? Should I be taking notes right now?
Yeah. So when you have a business, the first thing, what's the plan with this business if you become incapacitated? Because often, as a business owner, you're doing everything from, what do they say, chief bottle washer to, you're wearing a lot of different hats.
Right.
And how does this business continue if you're no longer able to do that? And so we're always looking at a little bit of business continuity. And then we look at business structure. Are we set up as a sole proprietorship, or are we as a corporation, an LLC?
Right.
How are we taxed? Are we taking advantage of that? And so, because those things will factor in as the attorney, how I'm going to put an estate plan together, potentially, how I can, incorporate that into the plan. Often for business owners, so I'm always weighing, do we use a will-based plan? Do we use a trust-based plan? Two basic ways we're going to put an estate plan together. For business owners, often we're leaning towards that trust a bit, because I tell people, think of a trust as being like a legal safe, right? And I can put assets into the safe, including business assets. And so that upon incapacity or death, we've named people to make decisions on our behalf. And so whether they're doing so at the shareholder level, or they, do we have a business plan or continuity plan that's allowing, for replacement officers. So all that's got to be factored in to it. And again, don't overcomplicate it. Just make sure that we're planning for those business assets, because that is when you leave a business at your death or incapacity, and other people who are not familiar with this have to step in and take over, and it's all titled in your name and getting in, often that is the end of that business. The costs and complexity of doing so are so overwhelming that we lose so much value that goes in. So we just need to plan.
And a nightmare for that person, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So business owners, I'm like, we got to get this done, and it's,
I might have a prospect for you here.
Would be happy to talk to you about that.
Well, and I think that, just the idea of having everything kind of in place and knowing what's going to happen. One of the things I was also going to ask you too is there a business structure that works better for a trust than others, like C Corp versus LLC, whatever the different types of businesses out there?
Well, I don't know that there's one that works better. The rules are certainly different of how we go. I mean, an LLC, I suppose, would be easier to transfer those interests into a trust or estate plan than a corporation. With a corporation, we've got to, recall the shares of stock and then reissue them in the name of the trust or something. With an LLC, I can, in essence, wave the magic wand and just assign those interests over. But no, I don't know that really makes it, advantageous one way or the other. Certainly, I think people have often not thought through fully how they're taxed. And so for most businesses, we've got a lot of flexibility there. Do we take the S corp election? Are we, taxed if we've got partners as a partnership? How are we doing the taxes? And so that back to that team sport, I look at someone, especially a business owner, your CPA or tax advisor is a team player on that. And we just want to make sure we're on the same page.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to switch gears to probate. I think that's a kind of a scary word for most people. Can you talk about why is the probate system so challenging? I mean, what is it about it that we don't want our stuff going to probate?
Well, probate by its very nature tends to be somewhat complex. It's rule driven, and so for people who don't deal in this every day, it can be overwhelming because they just don't understand the rules. It's going to involve the court. Now, probate is not as bad as it once was. I mean, now most states have some form of, simplified administration, informal administration, but it's still going to involve the court, and the court's going to, they're coming into this like, hey, we've got to divide this stuff up, and we're either dividing it in accordance with a will or under the laws of intestacy. So if you're in probate, you're in one or the other, right? Either you didn't have a plan in place, and so you're in the state laws, what we call laws of intestacy, or you had a will. And that's what a lot of people don't understand. So here would be another misconception I didn't cover, that wills don't have to go through probate. Wrong answer. Wills by their very nature must be probated. It's just with a will, you decided when you created the will, you decided who gets what. Whereas if you didn't do any planning, the state decides who gets what. It's going under the plan. But how do we get the assets, your home, your bank accounts, how do we get it in the name of the kids or whoever we left it to? Well, that's what probate court does. So if we boil down to, what's the essence or, purpose of probate, it's really to take assets that were titled in the name of somebody who's dead and retitle it to the name of somebody who's alive. The will just tells the court who gets them. But the court, in doing that, is going to make sure, well, what does this stuff work? How do we got to get appraisals done. We got to value things.
Yeah.
We have to make sure everybody's got notice and opportunity to appear in court and challenge things. And so because of that process and misunderstandings and the easy opportunity to come in, we see more arguing and fighting in probate than we might have had we planned this all out better and made sure things that transferred easily and there weren't court hearings and attorneys, because that's the other thing. Probate can get expensive. Trying to do it without an attorney is tough just because there are so many rules and that. And so you end up spending a lot more money than you would have had you just done some good planning up front.
Yeah, that's why you should do it right there. So talk about, let's switch gears again. Tell me about some of the other things that you're involved in. I know you've got cigar shop and give me the rundown.
So this is back to being that, entrepreneur, sometimes time and shine. So, several years ago, back in 2020 during COVID, my oldest son, he was a high school science teacher, and he was that kid growing up that, I was saying, why do they do this way as I went into business? He was the one looking up in the sky and, looking at the planets and dinosaurs and just asking lots of questions of that. So he had said, Dad, let's go down to Florida. I want to watch a nighttime rocket launch. And SpaceX had this rocket launch. So we went down to watch this, and I said, hey, while we're down, let's do a little fishing trip. I knew a guy that had a boat who had said anytime we're down, he'd take us out. So we had it all set up, and this was Halloween Day of 2020, so October 31st, 2020. and high winds moved in, and they scuttled the rocket launch. My buddy called the boat and says, "Oh, we're not getting out of the water today on my boat." And
Yeah.
and my best friend, who I'd grown up with in Emporia, Kansas, was with us on this trip. It was the three of us. So we went and sat in a little cigar shop in Orlando, Florida, called the Admirals Club, and we were having a cigar and a whiskey. And my son looks at me and says, "Dad, we could do this." And so here we are. So we own the Ash and Anvil cigar shop down in Gardner, Kansas. My son runs it. My buddy's also part of that, as well as my other two kids. And then we opened up a speakeasy bar next door called The Forge. And this is all in a building. The building we're in was the old blacksmith shop on the Santa Fe Trail.
Is that right?
And so we
Wow.
took it back to, the original brick and timbers and that kind of stuff. And so the cigar shop is the Ash and Anvil, right? Turning in with the anvil. In fact, we got an anvil sitting right in front of the humidor with a picture of the last blacksmith that operated in there.
Is that right?
In fact, we named one of our signature cocktails there, our old fashioned, after him. John Hayden was his name. His family's been in Gardner forever. So we opened the speakeasy, which is The Forge, and you come in a little blacksmith shop, and it's got a secret entrance. You got to pick up the phone and know the password, and the wall all of a sudden opens up, and you're back in this 1920s, speakeasy. A lot of history in there. I mean, the back bar was built from a communion rail that came out of church in Ireland. It was made in the 1600s, and that's been
Wow.
part of that is our back bar now, and it's just really neat piece. And then we have an outdoor bar with igloos and stuff for the winter months that is called the Bellow. So everything ties into that blacksmith. And that when we excavated that back bar area, horseshoes and blacksmith tool implements.
all.
Unfortunately, a lot of the tools got the backhoes and stuff, bent those up a bit. But yeah, we dug up a lot of it. It was a really cool.
So they're
process.
underground.
We had to remove a bunch of ground to get it to the level so you could walk out. We had to core out through the back to
Wow.
put doors in because there weren't any. But yeah,
That's-
it was a fun process. And my
So all
kids-
in Gardner then.
all in Gardner, all right there together. Yeah, and they're separate. There's no cigar smoking allowed. That's a Kansas law for one. But
Yeah.
but they're in the same vicinity. Yeah.
And how's that going? Is it popular and doing well?
It's doing very well. I wish the law office I could get so much interest and likes and everything that the community goes in. We have a very active online community of people going in, and it's something people can get passionate about. So yeah, it's doing very, very well, and it's kind of cool because I get to do business with my kids and my best friend and his wife, and so we have a lot of fun doing this. At the same time, I tell people, had I known what I was saying yes to when my son says, "Dad, we can do this,"
Yeah.
there's a lot of work that goes in, but we have fun doing it.
Well, he's probably enjoying it and learning a lot too. That's pretty cool running a business. And I've thought about having my kids involved. None of them are interested in video production or what we do here. So I was like, okay.
Well, I thought all three of my kids, I'd envisioned, that they would all join me in the law office. I think, I grew up in the era of Dallas, right? Maybe I watched too many episodes.
Right,
but
right.
We're Stockton and Kent. So my daughter, Sophia Kent, is a partner attorney in our firm. And so, so I get to be in her. But my two boys took other routes. So this was a way now we're all in business together.
Yeah.
That's fun.
That's awesome. So I want to wrap up here. Tell me what you see coming down the pike. I mean, in law for trusts and wills, is there anything that you see like changing or things that people need to be kind of keeping their eyes open for?
Well, I think the one that we're going is tax reform, tax going in. So we're in historical lows from income tax standpoint. If we look at where we're at now in our income tax brackets compared to where we've been as a nation, our current law has a sunset provision. But I think as we look down, it's hard to know what Congress is going to do. But I think with the election coming in, I think there's a good chance, because this law right now was passed under the first Trump administration, and there's been indications that his intent and I think is to maybe extend that. But we'll have to see what Congress does. But we always want to keep taxes on our radar screen. How do we minimize the impact of taxes? And there's so much opportunity there that people are missing. What I find, and this is not an indictment against CPAs or tax advisors, but their profession tends to be more centered on how can I minimize the impact of taxes for you this year and maybe looking forward into next year. But what they don't typically do, they're not looking, playing the long game down the board. How do I minimize the taxes over the next 20 years or for your kids when they inherit it? And there's so much opportunity in tax planning that is part of estate planning, and especially regarded to IRA. So I always tell clients, I'm looking at things through my tax goggles.
Yeah.
I want to help them to have a well thought out tax plan going in. So I think that's one of the things we go in. Not a lot of the law is a machine that moves very slowly as far as that. So I don't know that for most people that we're going to see, expect to see any big changes that would affect wills or trust in and of themselves. But taxes are always changing. We want to make sure we're taking advantage of the opportunities that are there.
Do you have a team that's, I mean, you've got to be studying that daily or something, I mean, just to keep up with how much changes, even the nuances. Here we are, the government's about to shut down. That's going to make this a timely thing. But, you got 1,500 pages of things that are about to be passed that they've hopefully are changing that. But, man, you got to stay on top of things like that.
It is. So, I just sent out an email to the attorneys in our firm the day before yesterday of, changes, proposed rule changes the IRS and Treasury Department are making that would affect a certain tax planning strategy that it often encompasses trust. And this tends to be for like the business owners and people who have highly appreciated assets. And so, being part of different national organizations that have people that's what they do, right? They're attending committee meetings and watching legislations coming in and IRS. So making sure that you're plugged into that stuff is an important part of my profession, because you got to stay on top of this to make sure that you're not giving bad advice or committing malpractice at the end of the day. So
how do you do that? I mean, is there an organization you're involved with, or is it just reading or going to? How do you stay on top of that?
All the above. So we are members of the American Academy of Estate Planning Attorneys. We have, twice a year, we're in person, with training. That's a big part of that, the education piece where they have speakers come in and we're learning, as well as just things throughout each month. NALA, we several of our attorneys attend the NALA organizations and dealing with the elder law. So National Association of Elder Law Attorneys. Big organization there, right here in Kansas City and Overland Park each year. And this is sponsored by the University Missouri UMKC Law School, the Estate Planning Symposium, which is a regional thing where it gets, they bring in national people really looking at taxes, change the law. So being plugged into those things, reading, you just got to stay on top of this. As I said, we're in a society where there's not a lack of information, but it's just making sure we're plugged into the right information and really, staying on top of it, because it can change quickly.
I'm glad you guys are doing that. It's funny. I one of the things I talk about a lot when I'm talking to potential clients is that a lot of people, the younger generation, that just refuse to read. They won't read anything anymore, and so we have to communicate visually with them. But can't do that with what you're doing. Go to those in-person workshops, I guess. But I was I grew up reading. I've always been a reader. And so I'm doing that. But I find like everyone else, videos are easy. So tuning to the things that you help do or business do is really good for us.
But
reading, it's just not something that I don't think a lot of people do that much more anymore.
Not like they did before.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast, and if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, like we sparked an interest or something like that, how would you recommend they do that?
Well, I think going to our website's probably the easiest.
StocktonLaw.com.
StocktonLaw.com. They can go in and learn there. They could certainly give us a call at our office, and again, with today's world, that's easy to look up. Look up Stockton Law or Stockton and Kent, and you're going to find us there. And so reach out to us. And even for people, because I'm sure you've got people listen that are beyond this. So we have attorneys licensed Kansas, Missouri, Arkansas, Illinois, and Colorado, right?
Oh, wow.
So we can cover a lot. But if someone who's in a state other than that, we can certainly help plug them in. Through those national organizations we belong to, we know a lot of attorneys. I sit on the board of governors for the American Academy of Estate Planning Attorneys, so I can certainly get them plugged in with an attorney that this is what they do wherever they're at.
You know everybody.
And,
Well, Glenn, I really appreciate it. I wanted to say to everybody that feel free to share this information. There's a lot of information here. Share it with people. Subscribe. Go to the website. Go to our website. Check all of our content out. We really appreciate it, and we thank you for joining us. And we'll see you on the next podcast.
all right. Thank you for having me on. This has been fun. Enjoy it.
Thank you. This has been In a World with Real Media. Thanks for joining us, and be sure to subscribe on iTunes and follow Real Media on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn so you never miss an episode.